he had talked about the Detroit the Detroit strike, the newspaper and stuff. Well, you look back at the Axle strike. I mean, that looked like we were sitting there rooting them on, going, yes, come on, let's let the UAW know what's going to happen, and let them know that we're not taking this anymore. And I was like so excited, especially after what happened with GM and Chrysler and Ford, the 2-minute strike, basically.
Right.
Come on, those strikes were a joke. And and the American Axle workers were out there, and they were on those picket lines for months, and it was just, and they were living on $200 a week. And you had to give them a lot of credit for that, but they wanted the 2-tier, obviously, for them, and to begin with, they got worse than that. They got way worse than that, and they voted it in. What happened? You were talking about the young people. The young people are scared that they're not going to have a job. They're scared that they'll close every single plant here. We know that they can't do that, but that's what the young people are. They're scared.
The leadership's telling them that, too.
Yeah,
exactly.
But the people are scared, so they're going, well, I'll just take whatever you're going to give me then.
Squabbling
So,
over table
it's
scraps.
like, we personally would love to see, people say, we've come up with the idea, and it probably would never come about, if every retiree said, I refuse to pay any more union dues until I can vote on contracts. If every active employee said, I refuse to pay my union dues, you have to still represent me because we're closed shop. I refuse to pay my union dues until you guys do what we actually want.
Here's the problem with that, or at least I see it.
I'm sure it is, but it was just one of those things that we
No,
came up
it's
with
not a
that-
bad idea. The problem is they're not surviving on dues anymore.
No.
They're accumulating
It's
$50 billion.
It's this. It's
You
the
know,
VIVA.
Yeah.
That's what they're...
Viva with Ford, Chrysler, and GM will now invest in Wall Street. They have a control of a $50 billion investment.
Tax-free.
I don't think they're worrying as much about organizing or collecting dues. The problem is, when people wanted to elect their union, they didn't want to elect a financial advisor or a healthcare manager. They wanted unions and union representation. What they have now is a problem with, a $50 billion nest egg, over $30 billion in GM alone.
Well, in Three Rivers, though, they're going down to $10 an hour. Majority of that workforce in Three Rivers got, I think, one of the worst parts of the American Axle deal.
Or Dean's been
Because
over
each
there.
track, is like, I'm sorry, Dean.
Thank you.
But each plant has gotten a separate national
They
agreement.
divided American Axle. Divide and conquer.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Yes?
Dean's got some over here.
Sorry, Dean.
That's okay. Thank you. First off, Bill and Pete, thank you very much for taking your time to come up here today. Your name, Pete, has come up through the years. A lot of us thought that family pressures and so on, you being in Florida, I've had family pressures being a little bit, as far as active in the UAW. Sometimes you just need to put it behind you. That was the concept some of us thought, but I'm so glad you came up to today and expressing what you're saying, because it's filling in some gaps, because I was part of New Directions from the very beginning and have stayed with the SOS group and so on. But I wanted to thank you also for your inspiration that you gave to me and other members in those New Directions meetings. Hearing your eloquent speeches and your history back then inspired us to do what we did, to get as far as what we did here at Local 599 and the other progressive pockets of New Directions. But leaders like you and Victor Ruther and Jerry Tucker, we hadn't heard that. Even though myself at Black Lake in the early 80s, there were somewhat progressive programs there. Back at the locals, they weren't speaking the same thing, but you guys were saying the same thing as what we'd heard up there, even more so. And so that inspired us. A couple of questions, though. Certainly in 1984, when we talked about the Warren letter, and you had it on the front page of your union paper, the Canadian Auto Workers left around 84, 85 time frame, and also the Saturn Agreement was brought out around 85, which no member had a right to ratify. It was just the leadership. With that in mind, what really did bring New Directions together with Victor Ruther coming out of retirement? And I know Jerry Tucker was very active in his inside strategies and when winning out there. But what, if you could give us a little bit of a history of who was the one that brought this meeting together and said, you know, we could do something? If you could have your thoughts.
Well, basically up until, I think when Jerry Tucker won the regional directorship, you know, at the best of my knowledge, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, he was pretty much a part of the executive board of the UAW. And anything that we were doing, no, I never heard from Jerry Tucker. Okay? Jerry got defeated for in his second term. Is that correct? He didn't make the second term.
That's right.
Right.
And thus then he went to spent the next years trying to get himself re-elected. Okay? And so in that time, I think New Directions came into existence. Okay? And it was basically a coalition of what Jerry in his region was doing with, and made contact with us, or we made contact with him.
I remember it a little different. I remember the struggle when Jerry was elected but wasn't seated, you know. And he had won his election, and the International didn't accept the election, said the vote was wrong. Jerry went to court and won a court case, maybe Ellis knows more about it, and was declared a regional director, and the courts forced the International Union to recognize him as a regional director, and he served out the last year.
Right, of a 3-year term.
Now, at that time, it was the same convention that we were pushing Donnie Douglas. It was out in California. We had met Paul Charade. Victor was part of the group by that time. You know, he had come into Michigan and helped Donnie Douglas. We were up in Flint, not that it was part of the election at the time, but just some of the history. Because I'll never forget driving. Victor had broke his ankle.
Yes.
And he needed to ride to the airport. And Donnie and Pete had been with him so much, they wanted a break, and so they needed a volunteer to drive her, so I volunteered. And we were at Stan Streaks' daughter's wedding. We're at the local, and I drive him. You know, I leave the wedding, and I'm driving him up. And he's saying, I take him, I won't let him get off. I make sure he gets a wheelchair, and I'm escorting him, and he's just beside himself that somebody could be that close to him, you know, that he's saying, this guy left this wedding. I said, Victor, thank goodness it wasn't my daughter. I still would have left, you know. But I mean, Victor was such a kind, gentle soul.
Yes, he was.
And Sophie was just as wonderful. I would like to have known them in their heyday, you know. But from what I remember, Jerry was screwed by them at the time and was fighting for all the help he could get to win his case. And it was over a delegate, seating of delegates that it happened. Am I closer to the story?
You're both right, but go ahead.
I'm not trying to pick on people.
New Directions was born in Region 5.
Yes.
And
Yes.
in '86.
Right.
And there was a coalition between that region and our region.
The first convention was held in St. Louis.
Yes, I was there. I was there.
Right.
Brought Roger and me before, and we previewed it to us.
That's right. I was there.
Before it was ever released, you know, in the theaters.
In the nation.
We had a private showing from. So that was, you know.
Okay, here's my take on it. Something was going on that was different, that involved massive numbers of people that had not been the case before. And it was the election of Jerry Tucker, and it was Jerry Tucker deciding to leave the administration caucus and go independent.